Alcohol dependency, alcohol abuse, substance abuse, drugs. These are some of the contributing factors that may lead to the end of a marriage. My expert here today is Robert Epstein, and he's going to talk with us about how substance abuse factors into the divorce process. Now, Robert is the owner of Epstein Family Law here in Dallas, Texas. He is well known and well recognized by his peers for bringing not only a creative, strategic approach to divorce, but he's also very adept in the courtroom. And so it is my privilege to welcome him here today to talk with us about substance abuse.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's a privilege to be here today.
Well, I'm really excited to talk about this issue because I know it's one that so many families struggle with. They may struggle silently for many years before they get help. And I would just love to know, kind of at the outset, how do you see substance abuse issues impacting families in your practice?
Sure. So it's a common theme in divorces that we see. Oftentimes, a spouse will come in with a problem. Either he or she is experiencing some kind of alcohol use disorder, or their spouse is drinking too much, or maybe drugs are involved. And, it depends on, who, of course, I'm consulting with. But oftentimes there's a problem of denial if you're consulting with the person who has the allegations against him or her, so to speak. Sometimes it's a matter of accepting the situation and getting them to accept the situation, and knowing that family courts are here to help families, and they're not designed to be punitive. And while oftentimes messy divorces can lead to people attacking their spouse's character, we're really there to try to help facilitate a positive relationship between both parents and the children. So when a client understands that, they can be a little bit more open to options for them.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about denial, because I think when I've got a client who has a history or has the allegations have been made about substance abuse, and they may not be aware of it, right? They may not think that they have a problem because they're showing up to work on time and they're functioning pretty well. But it creates an interesting conversation to have. What do you recommend to somebody against whom allegations have been made against substance abuse?
That's a great question. I mean, even if they don't readily admit that they're an alcoholic or they have problems with alcohol or drugs, I still encourage abstinence because then it proves that they're abstaining from whatever substance they're being accused of doing too much of. And if they can show abstinence from drugs and alcohol, that will be great for their case, of course, and it will prove the allegations to maybe not be accurate. And it will also allow for them to really, progress in a way where maybe they're really getting the help that they need, even if they're not, admitting that they are alcoholic or addicted. Even going to a 12-step recovery meeting might be enlightening for them, and it could yield to positive results for them and for their case, even if they're not really admitting to a problem.
Exactly. It's one of those things, people don't realize this, but I think it's really important to know that especially when you're heading into the litigation system, if you're going for temporary orders hearings, you're going to have a hearing, and the other side thinks that you have a problem, they're going to ask for testing, and you're not going to necessarily have notice of that. I mean, they can do it there at the hearing and ask for it, and the court's going to order it. And, some of these tests it's pretty easy to test positive on, I think.
True. And especially with, the blood testing that they have now, which can detect drinking for a 3-week period, binge drinking. So yeah, a lot of it is subjective too. How much am I drinking? Is this too much? It might be too much for somebody, but not too much for somebody else. So abstinence overall is probably the best strategy, for lack of a better word, because you never know what's going to trigger a positive test with some of the testing that they have out there.
So when you say abstinence, are you saying like no alcohol, Robert?
Well, I am. That's what I would suggest, especially if there are periods of time when, they're alone with the kids, although it's sometimes hard to detect what exactly window of time that would be.
That's right.
When you go back and you look at those tests. So the best practice would be to abstain completely.
Especially in the early days, I think of when you're going in for hearings and everything's kind of getting set, it can be really, really critical. Abstinence is the best policy for sure, because if you test
Absolutely.
positive, then you're going to have all kinds of restrictions to further help, figure out, are you drinking when you have the children? Or are you not drinking when you have the children?
That's exactly right. And then next thing you know, you might have to blow into a breathalyzer device. And then if you inadvertently miss one of those tests, even if you weren't drinking, it's going to count as a positive. And it just leads to a lot of obstacles down the road.
I always say, if we're having to explain to the court why the test is wrong, we're not in a good situation.
That's 100% correct.
Yeah. So now let's switch a little bit and talk about the spouse who's concerned that their soon-to-be ex has a problem. How do you handle that situation?
That's a great question. I mean, first of all, I like to recommend Al-Anon for that spouse. It's a great resource for spouses and relatives and friends and family of active alcoholics or addicts, so they can find a support network of other similarly situated people going through what they're going through, and that can be invaluable. Now, from a family court perspective, I like to make sure that they are ensuring that the children are safe, that they're not riding in a vehicle with somebody who might have a drug or alcohol problem, and making sure that they're having maybe some other supervision around, maybe a grandparent or a family member or a mutual friend or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that's the primary issue, is the safety of the child. And, it's one thing for somebody to come in and have a long list of why their spouse is a horrible, horrible human being, but then they turn around and leave them with the spouse unattended. That isn't really consistent with somebody who really thinks that there is a safety issue.
That's right. And then that spouse or parent really runs the risk for their case that they're not legitimately concerned if there are times when they may have left the children alone with that parent who does have the drug and alcohol problem.
Yeah. Now, if you detect, if your client comes in and there maybe has been some really recent issues that have been really problematic, maybe it's a DUI or some other types of things, what kind of emergency steps can you take to help get relief for the family?
Sure, you can request a temporary restraining order that would prohibit the parent from having unsupervised contact with or possession of the children, unsupervised time with the children. And if there is a legal history of alcohol or drug related problems, and it's pretty recent, then that's likely to be granted that request. In addition to any kind of endangerment of the children, if one of the parents left the child in a situation where the child was at risk of any kind of physical danger, maybe drinking and driving with the children, or even threatening to do so, that could result in being able to get a temporary restraining order to prevent that parent from being around the child without some kind of supervision.
I think it's important for people to understand, like, the different sort of phases in a divorce proceeding or in a suit affecting a parent-child relationship. So that temporary restraining order, oftentimes the courts will err on the side of protecting the children, but it's really a temporary Band-Aid.
True.
Right? And it just covers the initial couple weeks so we can get in for a full hearing in front of the court.
That's true, yeah.
Once we're in front of the court, how do you find, in general, in your experience, that courts respond to allegations of substance abuse?
So I think what they will usually do to err on the side of caution is, if there's a positive drug or alcohol test, then the court may order periodic testing, random testing, may order a breathalyzer device known as SoberLink to be utilized during time with the children for that parent, and then if there's maybe somewhere between I would say maybe 90 days and 6 months of clean and sober testing, proof of that, then maybe that will be discontinued if the parent can show that there really hasn't been a problem with that.
Right. And that 6 months or 9 months or 6 weeks or whatever can be pretty arduous. It can be pretty difficult. Like you were saying, things happen with the device, it's not working or whatever, and it can be problematic. So it's best to avoid that at all in the first stage.
Agreed, and I also think one of the things that could help is to to have a support network during that time,
Mhm.
and even if the parent isn't readily admitting that he or she is an alcoholic or an addict, even to just go to AA meetings and have a sign-in sheet is proof that you're actually concentrated on this problem.
And that's one of the things that people often kind of share with me is that a concern is that, well, is it going to look bad if I'm going to my therapist? Is it going to look bad if I'm going to AA meetings? And what is your response? I mean, what have you seen? How do you see the courts treat that kind of?
No, if anything, it's an asset
Yeah.
to the case for that parent who's going through those issues. I think that it can only help, and family courts believe in second chances, and they're very supportive of recovery. If anything, if they're not working a program or if they're not seeking mental health treatment, then the judge may be concerned about that.
That's exactly right. And I think you're right. The second chance, I mean, everybody loves a good rehabilitation story. The courts actually want parents to be having a relationship with their children. And so for parents who are willing to do the work, I think that that's often, they're rewarded for that.
Absolutely.
Now, as I think about that, I also think about sort of the reverse of the parent who doesn't have the history of substance abuse, but they've been in this toxic relationship for a very long time. Their partner goes off to rehab, the partner's doing AA programs, their partner's going to counseling, and they're kind of on a path towards healing. The person who wasn't the didn't have the problem, there's still a lot of issues there to deal with. And I'm so glad you mentioned Al-Anon, because that's really a fabulous program.
Absolutely. No question about it. And that's not to say that, the parent who doesn't have those issues needs to like the other parent. But I think generally wanting to strive for the same goal for both parents to have a healthy relationship with the child or children, the kids need that. And I think that's what the focus needs to be on.
And then talking about kids, what kind of support is available for children if they have a parent who's been, struggling with substance abuse?
That's a great question. I think that oftentimes a play therapist for particularly young children would be good, or just any kind of mental health professional who has experience with families going through conflict, and B, addiction and recovery and that sort of thing. I think that would be an asset for any child who's experiencing this in their home.
Absolutely. And, there are so many resources available. And I think if you are struggling with substance abuse issues in your family, one of the things to know is that we see a lot of that in divorce courts. I mean, it just is a common problem. And so you're not alone in it, whether you're the one who's, having the accusations made, or you're the spouse who's been living with it for a long time. There's really not shame associated with this.
No, not at all. And in fact, if you go to those support networks, you're going to find other like-minded people, similarly situated people, and it's going to be relieving to be able to have that type of network to be able to depend upon.
Now, we've talked a little bit about sort of what happens in court and how the courts view that. I guess I would ask you first, before we move off of that, who are some of the players that we're going to see in a courtroom when we're dealing with alcohol and dependency issues?
Sure. So a child custody evaluator may be testifying at a final hearing regarding recommendations for the parenting time for both parents to have with the children. We can also see a drug and alcohol counselor, somebody who is therapeutically treating the parent who has the addiction. We could also see potentially a drug testing or alcohol testing lab, custodian of records testifying to the authenticity of drug and alcohol testing results. And then furthermore, we could see a lot of people from AA. Sponsors sometimes make the best witnesses for people who are going through recovery. Sometimes there are more people than just that parent's sponsor who are willing to testify that so-and-so is showing up and really working a good program.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think those specialists that we call in to testify, I mean, that's certainly a financial factor associated with that. So these these battles can be very expensive in the court system.
That's true.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit because court is one place where these issues get hammered out. And obviously that's necessary. People, can't reach resolution outside of the courtroom. But there's another process called the collaborative divorce process.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about how you've seen substance abuse issues handled in collaborative divorce and what your opinion is about that.
Sadly, I haven't seen it handled collaboratively enough, and it's actually something that could be resolved very effectively in the collaborative law process. Oftentimes, these issues get litigated where somebody wants to go to court and seek an emergency order, and that sometimes is necessary. But I think that if you have a spouse who is maybe acknowledging a problem, not in denial, collaborative law could be an excellent option to have a team of professionals, a lawyer for each spouse, and then a neutral mental health professional and a neutral financial professional assist this family in resolving the issues and, really being a cheerleader for, whoever is experiencing drug or alcohol problems and helping them in their recovery.
One of the things that I've really appreciated about using the collaborative divorce process in substance abuse issues is the fact that we can deal with things honestly. We can have very frank conversations, and where in litigation, you're on the defense. If you're accused of having a substance abuse issues, now you've got to defend yourself against that. Do the right things, get the right counselors, be sober, abstain. But in collaborative, we're really together as a team. Everybody's focused on really finding the best resolution.
Absolutely. Mutually aligned goals.
Yeah. And so you're not in that, you're not encouraging denial. You're not encouraging this defensive posture. Instead of, it's really looking at what's going to be best to help this family.
Yeah, absolutely. Being candid about the problems.
I had many years ago, I had a client who we started the collaborative divorce process, and the decision was made that she would go to rehab, and she went to rehab. And we could put a hold on the entire process, and it really allowed her time to go and heal and to work on the issues, and then also to establish trust, to establish a foundation of that period of sobriety. And the outcome was dramatically different in that case than it would have been if it had been in litigation. I'm
sure. Yeah. That's wonderful. That's how it should be handled.
It really is.
If it can be.
Yeah. And I think, as professionals, when we have to go to battle, we certainly go to battle, and, you hold people accountable and cross-examine them in the courtroom. But, to be able to approach these problems from a compassionate place, it's really focused on healing, I think, is a much better service to families.
100%. I agree with that.
Now, you are open about the fact, Robert, that substance abuse is something that you've dealt with in your own life. So I just would invite you, if you, to share with us kind of your own experience.
Sure. So about 10 years ago, I realized that I had a problem with alcohol, that I was drinking too much. And, it was just creating more problems for me than benefits. And I wanted to do something about it. And fortunately, I did. And I called one of the experts who historically a lot of family court professionals have relied upon in the past, a gentleman named Mickey Bickers. And I told him, I think I have a problem. And he said, what do you want to do about it? And I said, well, I want to stop. And so he took me to my first AA meeting, and I've been going since. And that was about 10 years ago.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah. Congratulations. And how has that sort of impacted your practice in terms of dealing with substance abuse issues?
Well, it certainly makes me more knowledgeable, I think, about what a recovery program is like, and what clients are going through when they're working the steps and they're going to meetings and getting a sponsor. So I have that firsthand experience now, but I also think that it really makes me even more passionate about helping families going through these issues, because I've seen what dividends it's paid me in my life over the past 10 years. And I would want that for anyone else who, is also wanting to get better.
And you know what it was like at that crossroads where you knew if you didn't take action that things would go down a road that you didn't want to go down.
Absolutely.
And what was it for you? Were you able to kind of envision a different future when you were sitting at that crossroads, or just kind of avoid the pain that you were experiencing?
Yes. I was at a crossroads. I was one of the not yets, so to speak, meaning that I hadn't yet received a DUI or a DWI. I hadn't yet lost my marriage or my job. And I think that had I continued to drink, I would have progressively gotten to those places because my drinking progressed over time, got worse and worse. It got to a point where I realized I couldn't even stop just drinking on Mondays and Tuesdays because I said, well, what if I just stopped drinking on Mondays and Tuesdays? I couldn't do that. And then I really knew I was in trouble. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was a matter of wanting to really keep my career as a lawyer. I love what I do. More importantly, I love my wife. I wanted to stay married. She didn't present it as an ultimatum. This was something that I just did on my own. And I'm glad that I did because, since I've done that, my life has been immeasurably blessed over the last 10 years.
And so I'm just by way of kind of comparison, where were you then and where are you now?
So I think 10 years ago, I was probably a pretty resentful person, just in a place where I wasn't very happy. I was constantly comparing myself to other people. I was dissatisfied with, how I felt. I was not accepting certain situations that were beyond my control. And then I learned how to practice acceptance, which is really the first step in any kind of 12-step program. And I realized that I'm not really in control of those things that I have no power over, and that's okay. And so learning these things along with abstaining from alcohol allowed me to maintain my abstinence one day at a time from drinking alcohol, but also allowed me to really get in the right headspace to know that there's more to life than just maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, which is really what I strived to do when I was drinking, so that I could really go forward in a way where I could achieve my goals and know what those are and really, go after them.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that it will be helpful because that's just the way that these stories work in life is, to be able to be vulnerable and, kind of let your guard down and let people know that there's hope for them.
Well, it's my pleasure, Jennifer. Thank you for allowing me to share the story. And I, wish everyone who's out there who might, want to get better, a chance to do so by allowing themselves to be vulnerable and talk with somebody and give themselves a chance to really improve their situation in life.
That's awesome. I have one last question for you before we wrap up. And that is, what message of hope do you have for somebody who's struggling right now in a family with a spouse who either is dependent on alcohol or they themselves are wondering if they have a problem?
So it's one day at a time. And that's something I learned in AA. And it's something I practice every day in life as a sober individual. One day at a time. You don't have to know all the answers right now. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. And it's okay that you can't control all the outcomes. You just practice life in a way where you get through one thing at a time and, look at the goals that you have for your future. And even if you don't really know what those are right now, that's okay. Just know that you don't have to drink today. You don't have to drug today. And you can focus and move forward with your life in a positive direction by just, allowing things to be that you don't have control over.
I love your phrase, the practice of life. That's really beautiful. Every day is a new day to practice.
That's right. It's progress, not perfection.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. If you want to learn more about Robert Epstein, to get in touch with him, learn about his firm, his practice, or how he can help your family, we're going to include a link to his website, and we hope that you will reach out and be sure to subscribe and tune in for future episodes. We thank you for sharing this time with us.